London, September 1975. The Dorchester Hotel's ballroom was hosting the British Film Institute's most exclusive event of the year, a black tie celebration honoring the greatest achievements in British cinema. Michael Caine sat at table 8, nursing his wine and watching the evening's festivities unfold. He was there to present an award to his friend and frequent collaborator, but nobody expected what would happen when director Charles Beaumont took the stage. Because what Michael revealed that night didn't just destroy Beaumont's reputation, it exposed the dark underbelly of how power worked in the British film industry and changed everything forever. The Dorchester's Crystal Ballroom had been transformed into a glittering shrine to British cinema. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables filled with the most influential people in the industry. Directors who had shaped the landscape of British film sat alongside actors who had become international stars. Producers who controlled millions in financing mingled with critics whose reviews could make or break careers. At the head table sat Sir David Lean, the legendary director of Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago. Nearby, actress Vanessa Redgrave commanded attention with her elegant presence and sharp wit. Producer Alexander Korda's heir Vincent Korda held court with stories from the golden age of British filmmaking. The room buzzed with the energy that comes when the most powerful people in an industry gather to celebrate their own success. But beneath the glamorous surface, tensions simmered. The British film industry in 1975 was at a crossroads. American money was flooding in, changing how films were made and who got to make them. Traditional power structures were being challenged by younger directors and actors who brought different sensibilities and approaches to their work. Michael Caine represented this new generation. At 42, he had achieved international stardom while maintaining his working-class roots and authentic voice. He'd proven that British actors could succeed in Hollywood without abandoning their identity, and his success had opened doors for others who didn't fit the traditional mold of British leading men. But not everyone in the industry appreciated these changes. There remained a powerful old guard that viewed the democratization of British cinema with suspicion and hostility. They believed that filmmaking should remain the province of the properly educated, the culturally sophisticated, the socially connected. Charles Beaumont embodied this old guard mentality. At 58, he was one of Britain's most celebrated directors, known for elegant period dramas that won critical acclaim and international prestige. His films were technically masterful, visually stunning, and intellectually sophisticated. Critics praised his refined sensibility and artistic integrity. But Beaumont was also known for his cruelty. He had a reputation for destroying young actors who didn't meet his impossibly high standards, for humiliating crew members who made minor mistakes, for creating atmospheres of fear and intimidation on his sets. Industry insiders whispered stories about his behavior, but his success and connections protected him from serious consequences. Michael had never worked with Beaumont directly, but he'd heard the stories. More importantly, he'd seen the aftermath: young actors whose confidence had been shattered, crew members who'd been blacklisted for standing up to him, careers destroyed by his vindictive nature. The evening had proceeded normally through dinner and the early awards presentations. Michael had watched colleagues receive recognition for their achievements, had applauded genuine artistic accomplishments, had enjoyed the camaraderie of an industry celebrating its successes. But the mood changed when Charles Beaumont was called to the stage to receive the British Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award. Beaumont rose from his seat with theatrical dignity, his silver hair perfectly styled, his evening wear immaculate. He was a handsome man who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. As he walked to the podium, the applause was respectful but notably restrained, the kind of polite recognition given to someone whose work was respected, but whose person was not beloved. When Beaumont reached the microphone, he surveyed the assembled crowd with satisfaction. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of a career spent establishing himself as one of Britain's premier artistic voices. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beaumont began, his cultured voice carrying easily through the ballroom, "this honor represents more than personal recognition. It represents recognition of the standards that have made British cinema the envy of the world." There was something in his tone that made people pay closer attention. This wasn't going to be a standard acceptance speech about gratitude and humility. "For too long," Beaumont continued, "we have watched our industry be invaded by forces that would lower our standards, that would replace artistry with mere commercial appeal, that would substitute genuine talent with personality. The room began to grow uncomfortable. Several people looked around nervously, sensing that Beaumont was building towards something unpleasant. "I have spent my career fighting to maintain the integrity of British filmmaking," he said, his voice growing stronger and more theatrical, "fighting against those who would reduce our noble art form to the level of popular entertainment. Fighting against those who mistake charisma for craft, who confuse commercial success with artistic achievement." Michael felt his stomach tighten. He could sense where this was heading, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. Beaumont's eyes swept the room and settled on Michael's table. "We live in an age when actors with no formal training, no classical education, no understanding of the deeper traditions of our craft, can achieve fame and fortune simply by being themselves. When men who speak like dock workers are celebrated as if they were Olivier or Gielgud." The attack was unmistakable now. While Beaumont hadn't mentioned Michael by name, everyone in the room understood exactly who he was targeting. The dock worker reference was particularly cruel. Michael's father had indeed worked on the docks, and Beaumont was using his working-class background as a weapon against him. "I have watched with dismay," Beaumont continued, "as our industry has embraced mediocrity in the name of accessibility, as we have lowered our standards to accommodate those who lack the breeding, the education, the cultural refinement that real artistry requires." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. People stared at their plates, mortified to be witnessing such a public display of class prejudice and personal venom. Dame Judi Dench looked pale with shock. Sir David Lean appeared physically uncomfortable, as if he wanted to leave but didn't know how. Michael sat perfectly still, his face revealing nothing, but those who knew him well could see the subtle signs of building anger, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hand gripped his wineglass just a fraction too tightly. "Real artistry," Beaumont pressed on, "requires sacrifice, discipline, years of preparation and study. It requires understanding the great works that came before us, respecting the traditions that built our industry. It cannot be achieved by simply showing up and being charming." The word charming dripped with contempt. Beaumont was systematically dismantling everything Michael had achieved, reducing his entire career to superficial appeal devoid of genuine artistic merit. "So tonight, as I accept this recognition of a lifetime spent serving true artistic excellence, I want to remind everyone here that standards matter, that breeding matters, that education matters, and that we must never allow the mob to drag down the temple of art to their level." With that final insult, Beaumont raised his award in a gesture of triumph and basked in the scattered, uncertain applause that followed. But as he turned to leave the podium, a voice cut through the silence. "Charles." The single word, spoken quietly but carrying clearly through the ballroom's acoustic perfection, stopped Beaumont in his tracks. He turned to see Michael Caine rising from his seat. "I think you forgot something," Michael said, his voice conversational but somehow commanding the attention of every person in the room. Beaumont looked confused. "I'm sorry?" Michael began walking toward the stage, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "You forgot to tell them about Jenny Morrison." The name hit Beaumont like a physical blow. His face went white, and for the first time all evening he looked genuinely shaken. Around the room, people began murmuring to each other. Some recognized the name. Morrison had been a promising young actress who had appeared in one of Beaumont's films 5 years earlier. Her career had ended abruptly after that production, and she had disappeared from the industry entirely. "I don't know what you're talking about," Beaumont said, but his voice had lost its theatrical authority. Michael reached the stage and stepped up to the microphone without being invited. The evening's organizers looked panicked, unsure whether to intervene or let this confrontation play out. "Let me refresh your memory," Michael said, his voice still calm but carrying a steel undertone that everyone in the room could hear. "Jenny Morrison, 19 years old, fresh out of RADA, cast in your film The Garden of Remembrance in 1970. Beaumont tried to regain his composure. "Yes, I remember her. A mediocre talent who wasn't up to professional standards." "Is that what you call it?" Michael's voice grew quieter, more dangerous. "Professional standards?" The room was absolutely silent now. Everyone understood they were witnessing something unprecedented, but few people grasped the full implications of what was being discussed. Michael continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "Because I've heard a different story about what happened to Jenny Morrison on your set." I've heard that you told her she wasn't good enough, that she'd never succeed as an actress, that she should consider other career options. I've heard that you humiliated her in front of the entire crew day after day until she was barely functional. She was unprepared, unprofessional. I'm not finished. Michael cut him off, and something in his tone made Beaumont fall silent. But that wasn't the worst of it, was it, Charles? The worst part was when you told her that there was one way she could improve her standing in the production, one way she could prove her commitment to the craft, one way she could show that she really wanted to succeed in this industry. The implications were becoming clear to people around the room, and the atmosphere grew thick with tension and horror. I don't have to listen to these baseless accusations. Beaumont began. Sit down, Michael said quietly, and the command in his voice was unmistakable. Beaumont, apparently operating on pure instinct, sat down in a chair near the podium. Michael looked out at the assembled crowd, his expression serious but calm. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you something about standards. Real standards. Not the fake standards that Charles has been talking about Nike and that use education and breeding as weapons to maintain power, but actual professional standards about how we treat the people we work with. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. Jenny Morrison was a talented young actress who made the mistake of working with a director who confused power with artistry, who thought that because he could make beautiful images, he could treat people however he wanted, who believed that his artistic reputation gave him the right to prey on young women who depended on him for their careers. The room was riveted. This wasn't just a personal attack. This was an indictment of systemic abuse that many people in the room had witnessed or heard about but never dared to address publicly. Charles told Jenny that if she wanted to keep her role, if she wanted to have any future in this industry, she would have to sleep with him. And when she refused, he didn't just fire her mighting. He destroyed her. He spread lies about her professionalism, her talent, her character. He made sure she never worked again. Several people in the audience gasped. Dame Judi Dench had tears in her eyes. Vincent Corda was staring at Beaumont with obvious disgust. But here's what Charles didn't know. Michael continued. Jenny Morrison is my cousin, my father's brother's daughter, and when she came home to South London, broken and humiliated, unable to understand what she'd done wrong, she told her family what had really happened. The personal connection explained everything: why Michael knew the details, why he'd chosen this moment to reveal them, why his anger was so controlled and so devastating. For 5 years I've watched Jenny struggle to rebuild her life. She works as a secretary now. She never acts anymore. She never even goes to the theater. Charles Beaumont didn't just destroy her career. He destroyed her love of the thing she'd dedicated her life to pursuing. Michael's voice grew harder, more focused. So when I listen to Charles talk about standards and breeding and education, I think about my cousin Jenny. I think about a 19-year-old girl who had more real talent in her little finger than Charles has in his entire body, but who was destroyed because she wouldn't let herself be used by a man who confused artistic reputation with moral authority. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. You want to talk about real standards? Real standards mean treating people with dignity regardless of their background. Real standards mean using your power to lift people up, not tear them down. Real standards mean that talent and hard work matter more than who your father is or where you went to school. Michael looked directly at Beaumont, who appeared to have aged 10 years in the past few minutes. Charles, you've spent your career hiding your cruelty behind artistic pretension. You've used your reputation as a serious filmmaker to excuse behavior that would be criminal in any other industry. You've destroyed careers and lives because you could, because people were too afraid to stand up to you, because the industry protected men like you as long as your films won awards. The indictment was devastating, and everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing a fundamental shift in how these issues would be addressed going forward. But your films don't justify what you've done. Your artistic reputation doesn't excuse your treatment of vulnerable young people who trusted you with their careers and their dreams. And your cultural sophistication doesn't hide the fact that you're nothing more than a bully who preys on people who can't fight back. Michael paused, letting the words sink in. So keep your award, Charles. Keep your lifetime achievement recognition. But understand that everyone in this room now knows what kind of man you really are. And understand that the days when men like you could destroy people like Jenny Morrison with impunity are over. The silence that followed was profound and transformative. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. Finally, Beaumont stood up slowly. His face was gray, his bearing defeated. Without saying a word, he walked off the stage and left the ballroom. Several people tried to stop him as he passed their tables, but he ignored them completely. Michael watched him go, then looked back at the audience. "I came here tonight to celebrate British cinema," he said, his voice returning to its normal conversational tone, "and I still want to do that. Because there are people in this room who create beautiful work while treating their colleagues with respect and dignity. There are directors and producers and writers who understand that great art comes from collaboration, not domination." He gestured toward the assembled crowd. "Those are the people who represent the real future of our industry. Not the ones who use their power to hurt others, but the ones who use it to help others succeed. Not the ones who hide behind tradition to excuse cruelty, but the ones who build new traditions based on mutual respect." The applause that followed was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever experienced. It started slowly, with a few people clapping uncertainly, but it quickly built into something thunderous and sustained. People were on their feet, not just applauding but cheering, not just recognizing Michael's courage but celebrating the values he'd articulated. But the real impact of that evening extended far beyond the applause. Within hours, the story was spreading through London's entertainment community. By the next morning, it was front-page news in every British newspaper. "Caine exposes film director's abuse," read the Times headline. "The night Hollywood's dark secrets were revealed," declared The Guardian. But more importantly, other stories began to emerge. Actors who had been abused by powerful directors found the courage to speak out. Young women who had been pressured or assaulted came forward with their own accounts. The British film industry, like industries around the world, was forced to confront the systematic abuse that had been hidden behind artistic reputation and commercial success. Charles Beaumont never directed another film. 3 days after Michael's revelation, additional accusations emerged from other actresses who had worked with him. Within a week, his production company had dropped him. Within a month, he had left Britain entirely, reportedly moving to a remote village in France where he lived as a recluse until his death 10 years later. Jenny Morrison, Michael's cousin, was contacted by reporters who wanted to hear her side of the story. With Michael's support, she chose to speak publicly about her experience. Her account, published in the Sunday Times, became one of the most powerful pieces of testimony about abuse in the entertainment industry ever written. "For 5 years I thought I was the only one," she wrote. "I thought I had done something wrong, that I had somehow invited what happened to me. Charles Beaumont made me believe that what happened was normal, that it was part of paying my dues in the industry." Jenny's article detailed the psychological manipulation that had kept her silent for years. "Charles was brilliant at making his victims feel complicit," she wrote. "He would suggest that what he was proposing was actually a sign of his faith in their talent, that only special actresses were offered these opportunities to advance their careers." The Sunday Times piece prompted an avalanche of similar accounts from other women who had worked with Beaumont over the years. Sarah Whitman, who had appeared in his 1967 film The English Garden, came forward with her own story. "Reading Jenny's account was like reading my own story," Whitman told the press. "Charles used the same tactics, the same psychological pressure, the same threats, but I was older. I had more experience, so I was able to resist." Margaret Stevens, a costume designer who had worked on 3 of Beaumont's films, revealed that she had witnessed inappropriate behavior but had been too afraid to report it. "Charles made it very clear that crossing him would mean never working on a prestige production again," she said. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from James Harrison, Beaumont's former assistant director. Harrison's account, published in Variety, revealed the systematic nature of Beaumont's abuse. "Charles had a type," Harrison wrote. "Young, inexperienced actresses from working-class backgrounds who were desperate for their break. He specifically sought out women who had no industry connections, no powerful mentors." These revelations prompted a formal investigation by the British Film Institute. The investigation uncovered evidence of abuse spanning nearly 2 decades of Beaumont's career, with complaints dating back to 1962 that had been dismissed or covered up by studio executives. As more details emerged, the entertainment industry was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about its own complicity. Major studios began reviewing their policies on harassment. Industry unions created new mechanisms for reporting misconduct. Professional organizations implemented codes of conduct addressing the misuse of power in creative relationships. The transformation extended beyond policy changes. Director Tony Richardson issued a public apology for not speaking out sooner. "I knew Charles could be difficult," Richardson said, "but I convinced myself that what happened behind closed doors wasn't my business." Michael Caine showed me how wrong I was. Producer David Putnam went further, establishing a fund to support actors and crew members who had been victimized by industry abuse. Michael's courage in confronting Charles Beaumont inspired all of us to do better, Putnam said. The ripple effects extended beyond the British film industry. Hollywood executives, aware that similar abuses existed in their own system, began taking preemptive action. Several high-profile directors quietly retired or stepped back from active filmmaking. 3 months after the Dorchester incident, Michael received a letter from young actress Emma Thompson. "Dear Michael, I wasn't at the Dorchester that night, but everyone in our generation knows what you did. You didn't just defend your cousin, you defended all of us. You showed us that we don't have to accept abuse as the price of pursuing our dreams." The impact on Michael's own career was significant but complex. While many praised his courage, some powerful figures quietly resented his role in exposing uncomfortable truths. Several projects were quietly canceled. There was definitely a price to pay. Michael reflected years later, "But I never regretted what I did. Some things are more important than career considerations." However, the long-term effect was overwhelmingly positive. Directors who valued integrity actively sought him out. 6 months later, screenwriter William Goldman approached Michael with The Eagle Has Landed, specifically citing his moral courage as a reason to work with him. The scandal also changed how the British press covered the entertainment industry. Entertainment reporter Sarah Mitchell produced a groundbreaking series on abuse that won multiple journalism awards. Michael Caine's confrontation opened the door for serious journalism about these issues, Mitchell said. Jenny Morrison filed a civil lawsuit against Beaumont, establishing important legal precedents. Jenny's case helped establish that the statute of limitations for sexual harassment should account for psychological factors that prevent victims from coming forward immediately, explained her barrister. Years later, when Michael was asked about that night, he said, "I didn't plan to confront Charles Beaumont, but when I heard him use my cousin's pain to make himself feel superior, I realized someone had to say something. Someone had to break the silence that protected men like him." He added, "The hardest part wasn't confronting Charles, it was watching Jenny suffer for years, knowing what had really happened, but not knowing how to help her. When Charles gave me that opening, I finally had the chance to give my cousin her voice back." In 2000, when Michael was knighted, his acceptance speech referenced the incident. "This honor recognizes not just my work as an actor, but my commitment to the values that should guide our industry. Talent is important, but character is more important." Jenny Morrison eventually returned to acting in her 40s, appearing in successful television productions. "Michael didn't just defend me that night," she said in a 2010 interview. "He showed me that my story mattered, that my pain had meaning. He gave me back my voice." Today, when people in the entertainment industry face abuse or harassment, many remember Michael Caine's confrontation with Charles Beaumont, not as a model for public revenge, but as an example of how to use truth and moral authority to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. The night Michael Caine exposed Charles Beaumont's darkest secret didn't just destroy one man's reputation, it began a transformation of how the British film industry treated its most vulnerable members. It proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to let cruelty hide behind artistic respectability. And it showed that real standards aren't about education or breeding or cultural sophistication. They're about treating people with dignity, using power responsibly, and standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves.